He ran away from home. A lonely rancher found him freezing in the snow. Neither expected to fall in love. Winter had arrived early that year, settling over the valley like a heavy silence. Snow stretched across the open fields in smooth, unbroken sheets, swallowing fence lines and softening the land's sharp edges. The ranch sat alone beneath a pale gray sky, its wooden buildings dark against the white smoke drifting lazily from a single chimney. It was the kind of place where the world felt far away, where time moved slowly, and where loneliness could either heal you or finish breaking you. Luke had chosen this isolation on purpose. He stood on the porch with a mug warming his hands, watching the wind lift fine snow into the air. His breath fogged in front of him as he stared out toward the road, a narrow line barely visible beneath the ice. Winters were always quiet here, quieter than the rest of the year, and that suited him. Silence didn't ask questions. Silence didn't remind him of what he'd lost. Inside, everything was neat, almost too neat. One plate on the table, one coat on the hook, one pair of boots by the door. Luke had learned to live that way after grief hollowed out his life, leaving behind habits built for one. He worked, he ate, he slept. The ranch kept him busy, and winter gave him an excuse to stay hidden. By late afternoon, the light was already fading. The sky deepened to blue, and the cold sharpened, biting through layers of clothing. Luke pulled on his coat and stepped off the porch, boots crunching against the snow as he headed toward the barn. The animals needed checking before night fell. They always did. Responsibility had a way of grounding him, keeping his thoughts from wandering too far. He was halfway across the yard when he noticed something that didn't belong. At first, he thought it was just a shadow near the fence line, a trick of the fading light. But as he drew closer, the shape didn't disappear. It shifted, moved. Luke slowed, his instincts kicking in. Out here, nothing showed up by accident. He called out once, his voice low and careful, but the wind quickly swallowed it. There was no reply. The shape stayed still. When he was close enough to see clearly, his breath caught. A boy sat hunched against the fence, arms wrapped around himself, head bowed as if the weight of the sky had finally become too much. Snow clung to his hair and shoulders, melting slowly into the fabric of his jacket. His boots were thin and soaked through. His knees were drawn tight to his chest, a pose that spoke of exhaustion more than cold. Luke stopped a few feet away, heart pounding for reasons he couldn't immediately name. "Hey!" he said gently, careful not to startle him. "You all right?" The boy flinched, lifting his head slowly. His face was pale, lips tinged with blue, eyes wide and weary. He looked younger than Luke had first thought, barely more than a teenager. There was a fragile stillness about him that made something ache deep in Luke's chest. "I didn't mean to," the boy started, his voice faltering. He swallowed and tried again. "I just needed a place to sit for a minute." Luke glanced down the empty road, then back at the boy. There were no houses nearby, no town within walking distance. And winter nights out here were unforgiving. "You can't stay out here," Luke said, firm but kind. "It's too cold." The boy hesitated, eyes flicking toward the house in the distance, then back to the ground. "I'll go soon," he murmured. "I'm just resting." Luke had heard that tone before, the kind people used when they didn't know where they were going next. "What's your name?" he asked. The boy paused, as if deciding whether it was safe to answer. "Ethan." Luke nodded. "I'm Luke." "Come on, Ethan. Let's get you inside. You look frozen." "I don't want to be trouble," Ethan said quickly, panic creeping into his voice. "I can leave. I swear." Luke crouched down so they were closer to eye level, the cold seeping through his jeans. "You're not trouble," he said. "You're cold. That's all I see." Ethan studied him, uncertainty written plainly across his face. He looked like someone who had learned the hard way not to trust easy offers. Snowflakes gathered in his eyelashes, melting when he blinked. "I don't have anywhere else to go," Ethan admitted quietly. The words landed heavy between them. Luke stood and held out his hand. He didn't step closer. He didn't push. He just waited. "Then come in," he said. "At least until the storm passes." After a long moment, Ethan reached out. His hand was trembling, fingers stiff with cold. Luke closed his own hand around it and was surprised by how light the boy felt when he helped him to his feet. Inside, warmth wrapped around them instantly. The heater hummed softly. The smell of wood and coffee lingered in the air. Ethan stood just inside the door, shoulders hunched as if expecting to be told to leave at any second. Luke took his coat, hung it up, then turned back to him. "Sit," he said, nodding toward the kitchen table. "I'll get you something warm." Ethan obeyed, lowering himself into the chair slowly. He watched Luke move around the kitchen, his eyes following every motion, cautious but curious. Steam rose from the kettle as Luke poured hot water into a mug, adding a packet of soup, and then another mug with tea. When Luke set them down, Ethan stared like he wasn't sure they were real. "Eat," Luke said gently. "You'll feel better." Ethan wrapped his hands around the mug and sighed softly as the warmth seeped into his fingers. He took a small sip, then another. Color slowly returned to his face. For the first time since Luke had found him, some of the tension eased from his posture. Outside, the wind howled against the walls, rattling the windows. Inside, the house felt different. Not empty, not silent. Luke leaned against the counter, watching Ethan carefully. A strange, unfamiliar feeling settled in his chest. He didn't know where this would lead. He didn't know how long the boy would stay. But as the storm gathered strength beyond the glass, Luke knew one thing with quiet certainty. Neither of them was as alone as they had been an hour ago. Ethan finished the soup slowly, as if afraid it might disappear if he rushed. Luke noticed the way he kept glancing up between sips, eyes flicking toward the door, the windows, the corners of the room, memorizing exits, measuring safety. It was the look of someone who had learned not to relax too quickly. When the mugs were empty, Luke cleared them away without comment. He pulled a blanket from the back of a chair and gently placed it around Ethan's shoulders. The boy stiffened for a moment, then slowly eased, fingers curling into the fabric. "You can take a shower if you want," Luke said. "Get properly warm. I've got some clean clothes you can borrow." Ethan hesitated. "I don't want to." "It's fine," Luke interrupted softly. "They're just clothes." After a long pause, Ethan nodded. The bathroom filled with steam, fogging the mirror and softening the sharpness of the night outside. Luke busied himself in the kitchen, giving Ethan privacy, though his thoughts kept drifting back to the fence line, to the way Ethan had looked folded in on himself, like he expected the world to keep hurting him. When Ethan emerged, hair damp and curling slightly at the ends, wrapped in clothes that were too big for him, he looked smaller somehow, younger. Luke handed him a towel and gestured toward the couch. "Sit. You'll warm up faster." Ethan sat, perching on the edge at first before slowly leaning back, exhaustion weighing him down. His eyes fluttered, then opened again, fighting sleep. "You hungry?" Luke asked. Ethan shook his head. "That was more than enough. Thank you." Silence settled between them, not awkward, just careful. The wind battered the house, snow piling higher against the windows. Luke poured himself a cup of coffee, then sat across from Ethan, resting his elbows on his knees. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to," Luke said. "But I need to know one thing. Are you in danger?" Ethan's jaw tightened. He stared at the floor. "No," he said finally. Not like that. Luke nodded. All right. Another pause, then quieter. Ethan spoke again. I left home a few weeks ago. Luke didn't react outwardly. He had learned that listening mattered more than fixing. That's a long walk in winter. Ethan's mouth twitched, almost a smile. I took buses when I could. Walked when I couldn't. Why here? Luke asked. Ethan shrugged, pulling the blanket tighter. I didn't really choose it. I just kept going until I ran out of places. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was heavy. Luke leaned back, gaze drifting to the dark window. This place isn't much, he said, but it's safe. Ethan looked up at him then, eyes searching. You don't even know me. Luke met his gaze steadily. I know you were freezing in the snow. That's enough for tonight. Something in Ethan's expression softened. His shoulders dropped a fraction, the constant tension easing. The clock on the wall ticked steadily as the night deepened. Eventually, Luke stood. You can take the bed, he said. I'll sleep on the couch. Ethan's eyes widened. No, I can't take your bed. You're exhausted, Luke replied. And you're a guest. I don't want you to think I'm taking advantage. Luke gave a small, tired smile. You're not. After another moment, Ethan nodded. Okay. Thank you. Luke showed him down the short hallway, pausing outside the bedroom door. The room was simple, neat, clean. He handed Ethan another blanket. If you need anything, Luke said, I'm right there. Ethan stepped inside, then turned back. Luke. Yeah. You didn't ask why I left. Luke considered him for a moment. If you want to tell me, you will. Ethan nodded, lips pressed together, then closed the door gently. Luke lay on the couch, listening to the storm rage outside. Sleep came slowly. His thoughts drifted, unbidden, to memories he usually kept locked away. Another winter years ago. Another empty house. Another silence that had felt unbearable. He pushed the memories aside, focusing instead on the steady rhythm of the heater and the knowledge that someone else was breathing under his roof. Morning arrived quietly. The storm had softened, snow falling in lazy spirals rather than angry gusts. Luke woke early, as always, and moved through the kitchen, starting coffee, frying eggs. The normalcy felt strange but welcome. Ethan appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, hair still damp from sleep, eyes cautious but less afraid than the night before. Morning, Luke said. Morning, Ethan replied softly. They ate together at the table. Conversation light. Luke asked about food preferences and allergies. Ethan answered politely, offering little more. It was enough. After breakfast, Luke pulled on his coat. I've got chores, he said. You're welcome to stay inside where it's warm. Or you can help if you want. Ethan hesitated, then stood. I can help outside. The world was hushed beneath fresh snow. Ethan followed Luke toward the barn, boots crunching, breath fogging the air. He moved carefully, watching, listening, learning. Luke showed him how to carry feed, how to move slowly around the animals, how to keep his hands steady. They worked side by side in comfortable quiet. No pressure, no questions. As the sun crept higher, spilling pale gold across the snow, Luke glanced at Ethan and felt something shift. A quiet awareness that this wasn't just a passing moment. Winter was long. The storm wasn't over. And whatever Ethan had run from, whatever wounds he carried, they weren't going to heal overnight. But standing there together in the cold, breath rising in the same air, Luke sensed the beginning of something fragile and real. Not a solution, not yet, but a start. The days that followed settled into a rhythm neither of them spoke about, but both seemed to understand. The storm moved on, leaving behind a world buried in white. The ranch became quieter still, wrapped in the slow hush of winter. Ethan stayed. At first, Luke told himself it was temporary, just until the roads cleared, just until Ethan figured out his next step. But mornings came and went, and Ethan was still there, moving through the house more comfortably with each passing day, learning where things belonged, how the floor creaked near the hallway, how the kettle whistled just before it boiled. Ethan woke early without being asked. He helped with chores, listened carefully, copied Luke's movements in the barn with a seriousness that felt almost reverent. He worked hard, harder than necessary, as if usefulness were a form of permission. Luke noticed but didn't comment. He remembered what it felt like to believe you had to earn your place. They spoke more now, though still in pieces. Small things, neutral things. Ethan talked about the schools he'd attended, how he liked reading more than sports, how winter had always felt safer to him than summer, because layers made it easier to hide. Luke listened, offering bits of himself in return. Stories about the ranch, about growing up nearby, about learning to live alone after life took an unexpected turn. Some conversations ended in silence, but it wasn't the sharp kind. It was thoughtful, shared. One evening, as the sky darkened early and snow began to fall again, they sat near the fireplace, boots drying by the hearth. The fire cast long shadows across the room, warming the wood-paneled walls. Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, wrapped in a blanket, reading a book Luke had taken from the shelf without much thought. He looked up suddenly. "Did you read all these?" Ethan asked. Luke glanced at the shelves. "Most of them. Untouched for years, though." "Why? You don't read anymore." "I used to. A long time ago." Ethan nodded, thoughtful. "It feels like someone used to really live here. Like, really live here." The words landed gently but struck deep. Luke stared into the fire. Someone did. Ethan seemed to sense the shift. He closed the book, resting it beside him. "You don't have to talk about it," he said quickly. Luke exhaled slowly. "It's all right." He hadn't planned to say more, but the quiet made space for honesty. "I had a partner," he continued. "Years ago, we planned a life out here. Winters like this. They were easier then." Ethan didn't interrupt. He just listened, eyes soft. "He passed away," Luke said. The words were familiar, worn smooth by time, but they still carried weight. "After that, the ranch felt too big. Too empty. I stayed because I didn't know where else to go." "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly. Luke nodded once. "Thank you." The fire crackled. Outside, snow pressed against the windows, blurring the world into something distant and unreal. Ethan hugged the blanket closer. "My parents kicked me out," he said suddenly. Luke turned toward him, alert but careful. "Because I'm gay," Ethan said. He swallowed, then nodded. "They said I was confused, that I'd come back when I was ready to be normal." His voice didn't shake, but his hands did. "I waited. I thought maybe they'd call. They never did." Luke felt a familiar anger rise, hot, controlled, protective. He kept his voice steady. "You didn't deserve that." Ethan's eyes filled, though no tears fell. "I know that now," he said. "I didn't before." That night, Ethan had a nightmare. Luke woke to a sound he hadn't heard in years. A sharp, broken gasp cutting through the quiet. He sat up instantly, heart racing, and followed the sound down the hall. The bedroom door was ajar. Inside, Ethan was tangled in blankets, breathing hard, eyes squeezed shut, whispering something Luke couldn't make out. Luke hesitated only a moment before stepping inside. "Ethan," he said softly. Ethan jerked awake, eyes wild, breath uneven. It took a second for recognition to settle in. When it did, his shoulders sagged. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to." "It's okay," Luke said, sitting on the edge of the bed, keeping his distance. "You're safe." Ethan nodded, wiping his face with his sleeve. "I don't usually sleep that deep. Storms have a way of digging things up," Luke replied. They sat in silence for a moment. The room was dim and warm. Ethan's breathing slowly steadied. "Do you want some water?" Luke asked. Ethan shook his head. Can you stay for a minute?" Luke stayed. Winter tightened its grip as the weeks passed. Snowdrifts grew higher. Days grew shorter. Ethan learned the routines of the ranch, the quiet satisfaction of work done right. Luke found himself looking forward to meals again, to conversation, to the sound of another person moving through the house. Sometimes he caught Ethan watching him, not in a way that felt uncomfortable but curious, as if trying to understand him. Luke wondered if Ethan realized how much space he had already filled. One afternoon, they drove into town together for supplies. It was the first time Ethan had left the ranch since arriving. He sat stiffly in the passenger seat, gaze fixed out the window, tension clear in his posture. "You okay?" Luke asked. Ethan nodded. "Just not used to being seen." Luke understood that, too. In town, they moved through the small grocery store quietly. No one paid them much attention. It wasn't dramatic. But for Ethan, it was everything. Just walking down an aisle like a normal person. Not hiding. Not running. Just existing. And for Luke, walking beside him, something long frozen inside began to quietly, slowly, thaw. It wasn't dangerous. And when they returned to the truck, Ethan let out a breath he'd been holding. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not making it a big deal." Luke smiled faintly. "You don't need to thank me for that." That night, as snow fell softly once more, Luke lay awake longer than usual. He listened to the sounds of the house, no longer empty, no longer echoing. He thought about Ethan's quiet strength, his resilience, the way he'd started humming absent-mindedly while doing dishes. Whatever this was becoming, Luke knew one thing with growing certainty. Letting Ethan leave would be harder than letting him stay. By the time winter reached its deepest point, the ranch no longer felt like a place frozen in time. Felt lived in again. Mornings began with the quiet sounds of two people moving through the kitchen instead of one. Luke brewed coffee while Ethan scrambled eggs or toasted bread, their movements naturally falling into sync. They didn't talk much before sunrise, but there was comfort in the shared silence. In the way Ethan slid a mug across the counter without being asked. In the way Luke set an extra plate on the table without thinking about it. Ethan grew stronger as the weeks passed. His cheeks carried more color now, his shoulders less tense. He laughed occasionally, soft, surprised laughs, as if the sound startled him every time it escaped. Luke found himself listening for it without realizing he was doing so. One afternoon, the sky darkened suddenly, clouds rolling in thick and heavy. Luke checked the weather radio, his jaw tightening slightly. "Another storm," he said. "Bad one." Ethan looked up from where he was repairing a broken fence latch. "Like the first night?" "Worse." They worked quickly, securing equipment, bringing the animals closer to shelter. The wind picked up fast, sharp and cutting. Snow followed soon after, thick flakes driven sideways, reducing the world to white and gray. By the time they reached the house again, the storm was already howling. They shook snow from their coats, stamping their boots near the door. Ethan's hands were red from the cold. Luke noticed immediately. "Sit," Luke said, guiding him toward the table. He filled a bowl with warm water and gently set Ethan's hands inside. Ethan sucked in a breath at the heat, eyes closing. "Sorry," Luke said quietly. "I should have called it sooner." "It's okay," Ethan replied. "I didn't mind." Luke watched him carefully. "You don't have to prove anything here." Ethan opened his eyes. "I know." After a pause, he added, "It just feels good being useful." Luke nodded. He understood that need all too well. The power flickered that night, lights dimming before going out completely. The heater fell silent, leaving only the storm's roar outside. Luke moved calmly, lighting lanterns and stoking the fireplace. "We'll be fine," he said. "It's happened before." Ethan watched him, reassured by the steadiness in his movements. They spent the evening near the fire, wrapped in blankets, the glow of flames painting the room in gold and shadow. Ethan told Luke more about himself than he ever had before, about how he used to draw when he was younger, how he'd stopped after leaving home, how part of him still missed it. "You should start again," Luke said. "There's no rule against it." Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe." The storm raged through the night, relentless. At some point, the wind shifted and a loud crack echoed through the darkness. Ethan startled violently, heart racing. Luke stood instantly, listening. "Tree," he said. "Sounds like it came down near the north fence." Ethan swallowed. "Is that bad?" "We'll check it in the morning," Luke replied. "Nothing we can do right now." Ethan nodded, but sleep didn't come easily. He tossed and turned on the couch, restless. Eventually, Luke noticed and spoke softly from his chair nearby. "Do you want to move closer to the fire?" he asked. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. They sat on the floor, backs against the couch, warmth pressing in from the hearth. The fire popped softly, steady and alive. Outside, the storm screamed, but inside, the space between them felt small and safe. "I used to hate storms," Ethan admitted. "When I was a kid." "Still do?" Luke asked. Ethan thought for a moment. "Not as much. They feel less scary when someone else is there." Luke felt the truth of that settle deep in his chest. In the quiet hours before dawn, Ethan fell asleep sitting upright, head tipped forward. Luke noticed immediately. He carefully shifted, easing a blanket around Ethan, adjusting his posture so his neck wouldn't ache. Ethan stirred but didn't wake. Luke stayed like that for a long time, watching the fire burn low, listening to the storm weaken. He realized something then, something he hadn't allowed himself to consider before. He didn't just feel responsible for Ethan. He cared. Morning arrived pale and cold, sunlight reflecting sharply off fresh snow. The storm had passed, leaving destruction behind. Fences were buried. A tree had fallen near the edge of the property, its branches scattered like broken bones. They worked together all morning, clearing paths and checking damage. Ethan moved with purpose, asking questions, learning quickly. Luke showed him how to handle the chainsaw safely, how to stack wood so it would dry properly. "You're good at this," Luke said, not as praise but as fact. Ethan flushed slightly. "I had a good teacher." Around midday they paused to rest. Ethan leaned against the fence, breathing steadily, eyes scanning the land. "I've never stayed anywhere this long since I left," he said quietly. Luke glanced at him. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need." Ethan looked down, boots scuffing the snow. "What if I don't know when that is?" Luke considered the question carefully. "Then we'll figure it out when we get there." Ethan met his eyes. Something vulnerable and hopeful flickered there. "You really mean that?" "Ido." That evening, as darkness settled once more, Ethan pulled a notebook from his bag. Luke watched as he hesitated, then opened it, pencil hovering before finally touching paper. Luke didn't interrupt. He just sat nearby, letting the moment exist. Outside, winter continued its long hold on the land. But inside the house, something steady was forming. Trust layered carefully over time. Warmth built slowly against the cold. Neither of them named it. They didn't have to. For now, it was enough to know that when the storm came, they faced it together. The deeper winter settled in, the more the days began to blur together, stitched into a quiet pattern that felt steady and real. Snow no longer felt like an interruption to life on the ranch. It was simply part of it. The cold lingered, persistent but familiar, and Ethan no longer shivered the way he once had. He moved with more confidence now, his steps sure even on icy ground, his hands steady as he worked. Luke noticed the changes in small ways. Ethan hummed while washing dishes. He lingered at the table after meals instead of retreating quickly. He slept through the night more often than not. These shifts mattered more to Luke than anything dramatic ever could. One afternoon, while repairing a section of fencing near the edge of the property, Ethan grew unusually quiet. Luke noticed the way his movements slowed, how his gaze drifted toward the tree-line beyond the fence. "You all right?" Luke asked. Ethan nodded, but it was delayed. "Yeah, just thinking." Luke waited. "It's stupid," Ethan said eventually. "Try me." Ethan leaned against the fence, breath fogging the air. "I keep wondering what happens when winter ends." Luke's chest tightened slightly. "Spring's a while away." "I know," Ethan said, "but it's coming. It always does." Luke studied him carefully. "You worried about something specific?" Ethan hesitated, then shrugged. "I don't want to be a burden." Luke set his tools down and turned fully toward him. "You're not." Ethan met his gaze, eyes searching. "You don't know how it feels to need somewhere this much." Luke's voice softened. "I think I do." They stood there for a long moment, the wind whispering through bare branches. Neither pushed further, but something fragile shifted between them. An unspoken understanding that this question would have to be answered someday. That evening, Luke found Ethan sitting at the kitchen table, sketchbook open. The pages were filled with rough drawings of the ranch, the barn in snowfall, the fence line at dusk, the house glowing softly at night. Luke paused in the doorway, struck by the quiet beauty of it. "These are good," he said. Ethan startled slightly, then relaxed.
"I'm rusty."
Luke stepped closer, careful not to hover. "You see things clearly." Ethan smiled, small and genuine. "It helps getting things out of my head." Luke nodded. He understood the need to give shape to feelings that didn't yet have words. A few days later, they drove into town again, this time for supplies and mail. The sky was bright, cold sunlight reflecting off the snow. As they stepped into the store, Luke felt Ethan tense beside him. "It's okay," Luke said quietly. Ethan nodded, shoulders stiff but steady. At the checkout, a man from town glanced between them, curiosity flickering briefly across his face before fading. Nothing was said. Nothing happened. Still, Ethan's hands shook slightly as he held his wallet. Back in the truck, he exhaled shakily. "I hate that it still scares me." Luke started the engine. "That doesn't mean you're weak." Ethan looked at him. "How do you know?" "Because strength isn't the absence of fear," Luke said. "It's moving forward anyway." Ethan absorbed that in silence. That night, the power stayed on. The house was warm and quiet. After dinner, Luke found himself talking more than usual. About his partner, about the life they'd planned, about the way grief had hollowed him out slowly. Not all at once. "I stopped letting people get close," Luke admitted. "It felt safer." Ethan listened, eyes steady, voice gentle when he spoke. "Does it still?" Luke considered the question honestly. "Not as much." Ethan swallowed, heart pounding. "I don't want to replace anyone." "You couldn't," Luke said firmly. "That's not how love works." The word hung between them, heavy and delicate. "I'm not saying," Ethan began, flustered. "I know," Luke said quickly. "I'm just being honest." They sat with that honesty, letting it breathe. As Christmas drew closer, Decorations appeared slowly. Luke hadn't planned it, but one evening he found Ethan stringing lights along the window, expression focused and hopeful. "You don't have to," Luke said. "I know," Ethan replied. "I wanted to." They cut down a small tree together, snow clinging to its branches. Luke watched Ethan hang ornaments carefully, as if the act itself mattered more than the result. The house glowed warmer than it had in years. On Christmas Eve, snow fell softly, peaceful rather than violent. They shared a quiet dinner, the fire crackling gently nearby. "Thank you," Ethan said suddenly. "For what?" Luke asked. "For letting me stay," Ethan said. "For not asking me to be anything else." Luke met his eyes. "Thank you for trusting me." Later that night, Ethan stood in the doorway of the living room, hesitant. "Luke." "Yeah. If winter ends, would you want me to stay?" The question was quiet, but it carried everything. Luke didn't answer right away. He stood, heart pounding, the weight of the moment pressing in. Then he spoke carefully, truthfully. "I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything," he said. "But if you choose to stay, I'd like that." Ethan's eyes shone, relief and emotion flooding his face. "I choose to stay." Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the world in soft white silence. Inside the house, the air felt warmer than ever before. Winter hadn't ended, but for the first time, neither of them feared what came next. The days after Christmas felt different, lighter somehow, as if the house itself had exhaled. The tree remained in the corner of the living room, lights glowing softly each evening. A quiet reminder that something gentle had taken root there. Snow still blanketed the land. Winter still ruled the valley. But the cold no longer felt so sharp. Ethan woke one morning to sunlight spilling across the floor, pale and hopeful. He lay still for a moment, listening to the sounds of the house. The low hum of the heater, the distant clatter of dishes in the kitchen. Those sounds had once felt temporary, fragile. Now they felt steady. When he joined Luke in the kitchen, there was an ease between them that hadn't existed before. Not dramatic, just real. Luke slid a mug of coffee toward him without looking, already knowing how Ethan took it. Ethan smiled at the small familiarity. They worked side by side that day, repairing what winter had damaged and preparing for what was still to come. The ranch demanded care no matter how the seasons shifted, and there was comfort in that constancy. As they stacked firewood together, their shoulders brushed briefly. Neither pulled away. That evening, while the sky faded into deep blue, Ethan found Luke on the porch, staring out across the snow-covered fields. "You okay?" Ethan asked. Luke nodded slowly. "Just thinking." Ethan leaned against the railing beside him. "About what?" Luke took a moment before answering. "About how long I've lived here, alone." Ethan didn't respond right away. The air between them was cold but calm. "Does it feel strange?" Ethan asked. "Not being alone anymore?" Luke glanced at him, meeting his eyes. "It does, but not in a bad way." Ethan's breath caught slightly at that. He looked away, then back again. "I don't want to rush anything," he said. I don't want to pretend this doesn't matter." Luke considered him carefully. "It matters," he said. "And we don't have to rush." That night, they sat closer than usual by the fire, the quiet stretching comfortably between them. Ethan rested his hands in his lap, fidgeting slightly. "There's something I should probably say," he admitted. Luke turned toward him, attentive. "You don't have to if you're not ready." "I am," Ethan said. He took a breath. "I've never been in a relationship. I don't always know what I'm doing." Luke felt a familiar protectiveness rise, tempered by respect. "You don't need experience to be honest," he said. We'll go at whatever pace feels right. Ethan looked at him then, really looked at him, and something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, trust, something warmer still. The next few days unfolded gently. They shared more conversations, deeper ones. Ethan talked about the fear that still lived in his chest, about the nights he worried everything good might disappear. Luke spoke about grief, about how loving someone again had once felt impossible. It still scares me, Luke admitted one evening. But not the way it used to. Ethan nodded. Me too. One afternoon, while clearing snow near the barn, Ethan slipped on ice. Luke reacted instantly, catching him before he hit the ground. They froze there for a moment, hands gripping arms, faces closer than either expected. You okay? Luke asked quietly. Ethan nodded, heart pounding. Yeah. Neither moved right away. The cold air seemed to fade as awareness sharpened between them. Luke released him slowly, giving space without retreating entirely. Thanks, Ethan said, voice soft. Anytime. That night, as the wind rattled the windows again, Ethan knocked lightly on Luke's bedroom door. Can I come in? He asked. Luke hesitated only a second. Yeah. Ethan stepped inside, standing near the door, unsure. I had a bad dream, he said. I didn't want to be alone. Luke nodded, pulling an extra blanket from the chair. You can stay. They sat on opposite sides of the bed at first, careful, respectful. As the minutes passed and the storm outside softened, Ethan shifted closer, tentative. Luke remained still, letting him decide. Ethan rested his head against Luke's shoulder, light as a question. Luke exhaled slowly, his arm lifting just enough to settle gently around Ethan's back. Neither spoke. Sleep came easier than it had in weeks. Morning light found them still there, the house quiet and warm. Ethan woke first, heart racing as awareness returned. He didn't pull away immediately. Instead, he lay still, listening to Luke's steady breathing, grounding himself in the moment. When Luke stirred, he opened his eyes calmly.
No surprise. No tensión.
Morning, Ethan said softly. Morning, Luke replied. They didn't rush apart. They didn't explain. They simply acknowledged what had happened, what it meant. Later that day, as they worked outside again, the world felt subtly altered. Not transformed, not resolved, but clearer, honest. Ethan caught himself smiling for no reason. Luke noticed and felt something loosen inside his chest. Winter still held the land in its grip. Snow still fell. The future was still uncertain. But something important had been decided, not with grand declarations, but with quiet choices made again and again. They were moving forward together. The rhythm of the ranch settled into a comforting cadence as the weeks progressed. Snow still blanketed the fields, heavy but pristine, and each morning began with the familiar scrape of boots through frost-crusted walkways. Ethan and Luke moved through the days together, their bond deepening in ways that didn't require words, shared tasks, quiet conversations, and laughter that was slowly becoming more frequent. A thread of normalcy that neither had thought possible. One afternoon, Ethan worked near the barn, brushing hay from his jacket when he noticed Luke leaning against the doorway, arms crossed, eyes thoughtful. The winter sun cut through the frosted air, illuminating the lines of Luke's face in sharp contrast. Ethan's chest tightened slightly, not from cold, but from a subtle, growing awareness of the warmth Luke brought, something steady and unshakable amid the frozen landscape. Thinking again? Ethan asked, his voice careful. Luke gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. Always. About work, the weather. Sometimes about things I don't need to. Ethan's brows lifted. Like what? Luke's eyes softened as he approached. like how someone new fits into a life that was built alone for so long. Ethan felt his stomach flutter, a mix of nervousness and hope. He adjusted the scarf around his neck, fumbling for words. I don't know if I'm supposed to fit anywhere. Luke stopped close enough that Ethan could feel the warmth radiating from him. You're already part of this, he said firmly. Not because I said so, but because you've made a place for yourself. Ethan's breath hitched. He wanted to speak, but the words tangled. Instead, he nodded, eyes on the snow-laden ground, letting Luke's presence speak louder than anything he could say. The day continued with tasks around the ranch. They repaired a fence bent under the weight of snow, checked on the animals, and stacked firewood for the nights ahead. Ethan worked diligently, careful not to draw attention to the way his pulse seemed to quicken whenever Luke's hand brushed against his. Luke noticed the subtle shifts, the small smiles, the stolen glances, but he said nothing. He allowed the tension to exist without forcing acknowledgement, knowing some things had to grow at their own pace. That evening, after supper, the two sat near the fireplace with blankets wrapped around their shoulders. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, but inside, the glow of the fire softened the world. Ethan's sketchbook lay open on his lap. He had started drawing again in earnest, capturing the ranch in winter light, the barn silhouetted against the fading sun, the footprints they had left in the snow. These are beautiful, Luke said quietly, breaking the silence. Ethan flushed slightly. Thanks. I guess I'm remembering how to see again. Luke tilted his head. Seeing is a gift, he said. Especially when you've spent so long looking without really noticing. Ethan's gaze met Luke's, lingering a moment longer than usual. He felt a strange courage swell inside him. Luke, can I ask you something? Of course. What do you want? Ethan asked softly, voice tentative. From me. From us. Luke's expression was unreadable for a moment. Then he spoke, voice calm but honest. I don't want anything rushed. I just want honesty, presence, trust, the chance to see where this goes. Ethan exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. That I can do. Luke's lips curved slightly. Good. Days turned into weeks, and the quiet winter landscape became a backdrop for subtle emotional milestones. Ethan learned not just the routines of the ranch, but also the rhythm of Luke's presence. How to sit beside him in silence. How to laugh without fear. How to allow himself to be seen without feeling exposed. The smallest moments carried weight. Sharing a mug of cocoa in the cold morning light, brushing snow from each other's coats, exchanging glances that lingered longer than they had before. One night, after a particularly heavy snowfall, Ethan sat on the porch steps, staring at the transformed world. The ranch glistened under a layer of fresh white, and the air smelled crisp and clean. Luke joined him, handing him a cup of warm tea. The steam rose in the cold air, curling between them like soft tendrils of smoke. You ever think about leaving? Luke asked suddenly, voice low. Ethan shook his head. Not anymore. Luke's eyes met his. Good, he said simply. Because I don't want you to. The words settled between them, unspoken promises forming in the quiet. Ethan felt a tremor of something he couldn't yet name, a warmth that had nothing to do with fire. Weeks passed, and Luke began to share more of his past, the memories of the partner he had lost, the life he had imagined and then had to let go of. He spoke slowly, carefully, revealing the pain without dwelling in it, letting Ethan understand without burdening him. Ethan in turn shared pieces of himself, the hurt from being abandoned, the longing for acceptance, the small victories of surviving alone. Their stories intertwined, creating a fabric of shared vulnerability. One afternoon, as they repaired a section of the barn roof together, The conversation turned unexpectedly personal. Do you ever think about what it would be like? Ethan began hesitantly. If things had been different back then? Luke paused, adjusting his hold on a wooden beam. All the time, he admitted. But we can't change the past. We can only decide what we do with what we have now. Ethan nodded. Yeah, now seems okay. Luke's hand brushed lightly against his as they worked. Accidental but electric. Ethan's heart raced. He tried not to focus on the way his chest tightened, the warmth spreading in the cold air. Luke didn't pull away either. They continued side by side, working in a rhythm that felt natural, inevitable even. That night, they returned to the warmth of the house. Exhausted but satisfied, Ethan hung up his coat, gloves stiff with cold, and caught Luke watching him. The moment lingered. You're really amazing, Ethan said softly, almost to himself. Luke tilted his head. Why? Just everything? Ethan murmured. How patient you are. How you make me feel safe. Luke's breath hitched slightly, emotions welling under the surface. I feel the same, he said quietly. You make this place alive again. They exchanged a look long and steady. Words weren't necessary. The fire flickered, casting shadows across their faces, illuminating the unspoken truth between them. Later, as they settled near the fireplace, Ethan rested against Luke again. Lighter now, freer. The house no longer felt like a refuge from the world. Felt like home. Not just the walls, the furniture, or the heat, but the presence of someone who understood, who cared, who had chosen to stay. Winter pressed on, relentless, yet softened by their companionship. And in that persistent cold, Ethan discovered a warmth he had never known. A quiet, steady love that grew in the spaces between small gestures, shared stories, and the simple act of being together. The snow outside continued to fall, unhurried, serene. Inside, the fire glowed, and inside their hearts, something fragile but unbreakable took hold. A promise of belonging, trust, and the slow, undeniable bloom of first love. The future remained uncertain. Spring would come, inevitably bringing change, but for now they existed in the moment, and it was enough, more than enough. Winter's hold began to loosen, though the land remained blanketed in a soft layer of snow. The sun hung higher in the sky, weak but steady, casting pale golden light across the ranch. The chill lingered, but it no longer cut as sharply, and Ethan felt it only as a reminder of the season that had shaped him. A winter that had transformed his life without fanfare or grand gestures. The days moved with quiet purpose. Mornings were spent checking fences, tending to the animals, and shoveling snow from the walkways. Afternoons were quieter, filled with tasks that allowed them to share the rhythm of the ranch without the pressure of words. Ethan's confidence grew steadily. His hands worked skillfully, his movements more assured, and his laughter began to come naturally, spilling into the air like small sparks. One late afternoon, as the sky glimmered with the soft pinks and purples of early evening, Luke found Ethan at the barn, brushing snow from the roof. Ethan paused mid-sweep, squinting against the low light. Almost done, he said, voice calm but proud. Just a few more spots. Luke leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching. You've really gotten the hang of this, he said, smile soft and genuine. Ethan turned toward him, snow clinging to his coat, cheeks flushed from exertion. I've had a good teacher, he said quietly, eyes meeting Luke's. Luke stepped closer, voice low. You've done more than learn chores, Ethan. You've made this place feel alive again. Ethan felt his heart stir. You made me feel like I belong, he admitted, hesitating slightly, unsure if he was allowed to voice it. Luke's eyes softened, and for a moment, the world outside, the fading winter light, The snow, the quiet ranch, seemed to recede, leaving only the space between them. "You do," he said, "and I'm glad you stayed." They lingered in that moment, standing close without needing to speak further. The air between them was warm despite the cold, charged with unspoken truths and shared understanding. For Ethan, it was a culmination of weeks of quiet revelations, small gestures, and growing trust. He realized he wasn't just safe here, he was wanted. That evening, the two of them sat near the fireplace, the room glowing with flickering light. Ethan had his sketchbook open again, capturing the cozy scene. The firelight dancing across Luke's face, the soft shadows that painted the walls, the sense of security he had found. Luke watched him draw, fascinated by the intensity and focus Ethan brought to even the simplest of lines. "You've come a long way," Luke said softly. Ethan looked up, eyes shining. "So have you," he replied. "I've seen you open up again, too." Luke smiled faintly, a mixture of sadness and hope in his eyes. "I didn't think it was possible," he admitted. "Not after everything. But you've made it possible." They shared a quiet moment, letting the warmth of the fire and their proximity fill the space. Ethan leaned slightly against Luke, a subtle but deliberate choice. Luke didn't move away. Instead, he settled his hand lightly on Ethan's back, a gesture of comfort and acknowledgement. As the night deepened, Ethan found himself speaking more freely, his voice carrying the confidence that had slowly been nurtured through winter's trials. He spoke of dreams he had long abandoned, of hopes he had buried under fear and loneliness. Luke listened, offering encouragement, sharing wisdom, and sometimes simply holding space for Ethan's words without interruption. "I used to think love was something I'd never experience," Ethan admitted, voice trembling slightly. "I thought I'd always be alone." Luke's hand tightened gently on his back. "But now," Ethan said, "I know it doesn't have to be that way. Not with you." Luke's chest tightened. "I feel the same," he said softly but firmly. The following days brought subtle milestones. They prepared the ranch for the eventual thaw of spring, stacking hay, tending to the animals, repairing fences. But beyond the physical labor, there was emotional growth, shared silences that felt intimate, glances that lingered longer than necessary, and quiet acknowledgments of affection that didn't need to be spoken aloud. One afternoon, Luke guided Ethan across a frozen pond to check a fence. The ice groaned beneath their boots, the winter wind sharp against their faces. At the center, they stopped, taking in the vast expanse of snow and sky. Ethan shivered slightly, and Luke instinctively drew him closer, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. Ethan leaned into him without hesitation, a small but profound gesture of trust and comfort. "You've changed so much," Luke said, voice low. "And I've changed with you." Ethan tilted his head, resting against Luke's chest. "I think we've both healed," he said quietly. "A little," Luke nodded. "A lot," he corrected softly. "More than either of us expected." Spring was still weeks away, but within the walls of the house and the bounds of the ranch, something had already bloomed. A slow, patient love forged in winter's cold, nurtured by shared vulnerability, and anchored in mutual trust. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was steady, warm, and enduring. As the final snow began to melt, revealing hints of green beneath, Ethan realized he had grown in ways he hadn't imagined. He was no longer the uncertain teen who had arrived weeks ago. He had found confidence, a sense of belonging, and the courage to open his heart. Luke had done the same, rediscovering hope and the ability to love after loss. On the last evening before the snow completely disappeared, they sat together on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching the winter retreat. Ethan leaned against Luke, a soft smile on his face. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." Luke held him close, voice steady and warm.
No.
Thank you for trusting me, for staying, for letting this happen. Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of winter lift, replaced by warmth that promised continuity and growth. Outside, the world was changing, but inside, everything felt settled, complete, and full of potential. They didn't need grand gestures. They didn't need dramatic declarations. The bond they had forged in the long, quiet winter was enough. It carried them forward into spring, into new beginnings, and into a life where they no longer feared being alone. And as the first hints of green emerged from beneath the melting snow, Ethan finally understood. Love, patience, and trust could turn even the coldest, loneliest winter into a home.